The last time we had a rate study? Does anybody know offhand?
I believe you guys did it first, but it
Been
was
a while
not,
since
it
we've
was under a
been here,
previous company name, if that gives you.
15 years.
I think it was 2006.
Okay. So, okay.
Yeah, okay. Okay. So what are the factors that affect the county's charges and rates? What are the assumptions for the model? So operating maintenance expenses, we're just being conservative here, using about a 3% escalation rate. I know, the CPI was about 8% a couple years ago, but it's kind of trending back towards its 20-year, 30-year kind of trend of 3%. So these are going to be all your things like salaries, benefits, materials, supplies, things like that. Obviously, your capital improvement plan is going to be probably maybe the largest driver. So that's going to be your investments in your treatment, distribution, your collection systems. Any debt service you have, so any existing debt service, you obviously need to pay that off. That's any principal and interest payments. And then any of the capital projects that we're going to then debt fund, we then calculate what that debt needs to be. Customer changes, so based on discussions with staff, we looked at some developments that are coming online where we're adding some new customers. And so we're looking at about 2% increase in customers per year over the next 5 years or so. And then in wastewater or sewer, looking at about 1%. However, in 2028, we anticipate bringing on Millington. So there's a large projects for Millington, building a new wastewater treatment plant, and then that's going to allow you to bring on those customers. So that's kind of a one-time bump in customers in 2028. We're being conservative actually on the usage. So we separate customers from usage. So you may be adding customers, but we're finding nationwide they're using less water per capita. So smaller household sizes, conservation, low flow fixtures, things like that. So we're just being conservative there and saying we're going to stay relatively flat on the usage side. And then miscellaneous revenue, that's anything other than usage rates and charges, so interest, penalties, any sales or ancillary services. Again, just being conservative there, saying 0% increase there. We're recommending 2 reserve targets, so both an operating reserve and a capital reserve. And typically the operating reserve is tied to a specific number of days or percentage of your operating expenses. So as your operating expenses increase, so should the target reserve. And we've set that at a minimum of 90 days or 25% of operating expenses. And then on the capital reserve, what we're doing here is we looked at all your fixed assets, what's the value of the assets for water, wastewater, and we're trying to get to eventually having 2% of that assets kept in a capital reserve, so roughly a 50-year useful life. And so for water, that looks like about $35,000 per year contributing to that capital reserve. And then for sewer, since a lot of your infrastructure is sewer related, about $130,000 per year for that. So what are the revenue requirements? This is just a fancy term for the cost of the system. It's the revenue required to be collected from customers. At the base, again, is O&M expenses. So that's salaries, benefits, materials. That's the blue column here, cylinder. Add to that any debt service payments you have outstanding. Add to that any cash funding capital projects. So if the cash fund is going to come directly from rates or directly from cash reserves. Purple being any new debt service. So again, that extends the payment terms over time, and then those reserve contributions. So we add all that up, that's our revenue requirement. We would less out in the miscellaneous revenues, and so we have a net revenue requirement, and that's what we need to collect from customers. So you have both user fees and you have allocation fees, right? User fees are what existing customers pay, on a recurring basis. Allocation fees are one-time costs that new customers will pay when they connect to the system. So operating expenses, those have to come from user rates. You cannot collect those from allocation fees. Now, capital expenses, they can either be system maintenance, is non-growth related, so just, repairing, replacing the system, or they could be expansion related where they're increasing capacity in the system. Ideally, those could either then be either cash or debt funded, but ideally the system maintenance or non-growth capital portion really should come from user rates, so from your existing customers. And then those that are related to growth, again, could either be cash or debt funded, but ideally those should come from the allocation fees, again, those one-time fees. There is a caveat, though. If the allocation fees are set at less than the cost of that capacity, or you anticipate all this growth and you build these, this infrastructure, and you don't actually end up getting those new customers, then you really don't have a revenue source, to charge. So you didn't have to collect those costs from user rates. So this is a snapshot of the capital improvement plan, current year being 2025, and then the next 5 years. This is just for water. We're showing it in two ways here. So the top chart is showing it by funding source and growth type, and then the bottom is just showing by project type. So you can see the blue there on the top chart, that's just saying everything for the water CIP is essentially pay-go or cash funded, and it's non-growth related. So it's really replacement, rehab, things that really should be collected from current customers through the user rates. You'll see a small sliver of red there in the current year. There's a little bit of grant funding you got there. If we can get them, grants is the best way to fund, because that means we don't have to pay them back. As you may know, grants are drying up, what we've seen in the past couple of years, so we can't bank on grants in the future. If you can get them, that's great, but we can't guarantee it. And at the bottom, you can see the majority of these costs are distribution, which is just the term for, the water pipes in the ground. So the majority of this is distribution related, a little bit of treatment, and then some other. And again, the scale here, if you look at it, we're looking at about 1.6 million is the top scale on the y-axis. When I switch over to sewer, you'll see we're dealing with larger costs here. So here the scale is 12 million. So a lot of your infrastructure, is wastewater, and it's more expensive typically to treat wastewater and things like that. So we're dealing with larger dollars here. The top chart here, we have multiple different funding sources. The majority here you can see is blue. That's the debt growth. So that's a portion that we will fund with debt. So we'll actually turn this amount into principal and interest payments. And so we won't have to fund entirely, $10 million in 1 year. We'll have to fund the payments for that. And what is that project, Dan? That's for the,
That's for the Millington wastewater treatment plant, assuming we don't get grants. This is like worst case scenario for the plant.
yeah. And so that debt you'll see is debt growth. So this ideally should be covered through allocation fees, but if allocation fees we don't collect enough revenue from that, it would then be in turn collect from user rates. I see another portion here for grants. So there's a good chunk here. That red is all grants in that top chart. So that's, again, does not have to be funded through county customers. That's going to come from, state, federal government.
ARPA and the funding we have for Millington currently, that's the red you see in the top chart.
Yep. At the bottom, you can see the majority of the wastewater projects are actually treatment related, a little bit of collection, but most of it, again, is for the treatment plants.
So water is much more conveyance, getting the water to people, while sewer is much more the cost related to treatment as opposed to conveyance. Okay.
Okay, so what these two charts show here, this is for water. The left chart, and here we're looking at a scale of 3 million on each of these. This is the cost of the system, the revenue requirements in each of these stacks here. So 25 is your current, 26 is, the next year. And you can see the portion that is for operating expenses in blue. There's a little sliver of current debt service payments that we have to pay off. Green is cash funding and capital projects. So you can see that large stack in 2026. That is really driving the need for, revenue in one way or another, either if it's through rates or through a general fund subsidy. This, if you see the note at the bottom, this is just reflecting a 4% increase in rates. So that kind of spike with that line, the horizontal line, there's a light blue line, that's the current revenue that you're bringing in, and then the dark blue line is proposed revenue. So with the proposed revenue, the 4% increase, you get a little more revenue, but the majority of that large spike is a general fund subsidy. And that's roughly for water, what is it, Connor? That's $1.3 million or so? Yeah. So, and then sewer, you're going to see, we split the subsidy between water and sewer based on revenues received. You'll see the sewer is actually even higher, so. And then how does that affect the cash balance? That's the second chart on the right. So anytime you would have a surplus where the revenues are higher than expenses, you should see your cash balance go up. Anytime it's, the opposite, you see the cash balance go down. The red line on the right chart is our target cash balance. That's the 90 days. And you can see we're not actually meeting that in the current year or next year. And we're just under it in 27, and then we finally meet it. The goal is we set this so that we would meet it by the end of the 5th year, so 2030. So as long as that blue stack is above the red line, you're meeting your target cash balance. And then turning to sewer, here you can see the scale we're working is $6 million, because we're, again, dealing with larger projects here. Again, that green block in 2026 is the main driver for having that spike. So that is all projects, next year that have to be funded one way or another, either through rates or through some general fund subsidy. And so this subsidy is around, I think it's like around $3 million to get to that spike. But again, this is a 4% increase, so it's only going to be 4% on the usage rates and charges. with the general fund subsidy helping pick up. And again, on the right side, making sure we meet that target at the end of the 5 years. This is a history of charges and rates. So you have a fixed charge for both water and sewer, residential, commercial. And this goes all the way back to 2011. You can see what it was and how it's kind of increased. You actually lowered the rates, it looks like in 2015, as you see, it kind of drops down and then came back up. Hopefully the customers appreciated that in 2015. Then you have a vacant lot, they're charged half the charge of a residential commercial, so those are all half of that. And then you have for water, there's actually a usage-based rate for any usage above minimum, so. And so this is what it looks like when you just do the 4% increase across the board. So again, that residential commercial charge, that includes 12,000 gallons of usage. And then the variable rates, so anything you use over 12,000 gallons, you then pay that variable rate per 1,000 gallons. And then these equivalents is just showing you that the vacant lot's half of the charge of the residential commercial. And then sewer is entirely fixed, there's no usage-based. Again, residential, you have a vacant lot charge, and then there's a small business as well. So now moving to the allocation fees, again, these are the one-time costs. These offset the capital costs of the backbone capacity in the system. There's really three ways you can calculate these, either based on the historical cost of capacity, if the customer's buying in, the future costs of looking at future capital projects, or kind of a weighted average, a hybrid approach of both. The current fees, you can see they're set up not just by, whether it's residential or non-residential, but if it's an apartment, if it's small business, if it's a nursing home, it's done by bed, if it's large family care, done by child, and you can see the allocated flow in gallons per day and how those are allocated. So it's typical if somebody is to build a home here, they would have 250 gallons per day of capacity. They would pay $4,500 for water, $11,800 for sewer. And again, that's for a new home connecting. That's not for a pre-existing home that just changes owners. It's for an entirely new home built. Our recommendation after doing the analysis is increasing these by 4% per year. So you can see we're kind of not doing it all at once in 1 year, kind of phasing it in over time. But these can be charged up to the legally defensible maximum amount calculated. We're just kind of phasing it in over time. This is what a bill would look like for a customer. It's pretty straightforward again, since everything's going up 4%, the entire bill will go up 4%. So right now, if somebody uses 12,000 gallons of usage, they pay roughly $148 for water, and then $191.92 for sewer, so about $340. That would go up to about $353, so roughly $13.50 increase. And that's a quarterly bill.
That's based on 4% increase, which has
Yeah,
been
so
the
that'd be a-
historical benchmark we've used. Yeah.
So that'd be next year's FY 2026 bill per quarter, if you use 12,000 gallons. This is a comparison to some surrounding utilities. So on the left side is a residential customer using 12,000 gallons. On the right side is a commercial customer using 36,000. And the blue is water, green is sewer, and then the total is at the end of the bars. The darker colors are Kent County. So you can see you're currently just below Sudlersville, so near the top for a residential if you're using 12,000 gallons. And that's because all of that 12,000 gallons is included in a fixed charge for for water and then sewer, where a lot of these other ones may be usage-based. So you can see when we switch over to the commercial and you're going more above that usage from the fixed charge, you go from the highest around the residential to almost the lowest with the commercial. Because then you start putting on, usage charges, which a lot of these other places have higher usage charges. And that was a local comparison. This is a regional comparison, so bringing in some other places in Maryland a little further away. You can kind of see similar examples. So we did look at one other option. If we didn't do a 4% increase, what if we did an 8% each year? And then how does that affect the subsidy? So in the first year, it doesn't have a huge effect. So essentially in 2026, there really wouldn't be a need to change that subsidy. But because of the compounding effect of 8%, 8%, 8%, it does save you in the future years. So you could essentially lower the future subsidies by about 25% in the future years if you did it this way. So with that, I'll take any questions. as you'd imagine, if it was anywhere between the 4 to 8, it would, be between those numbers as well, so. I know it's a lot to take in, so if you have any,
To summarize, they looked at our recent year capital expenses, the impact of ARPA and other funding sources we've received, what we currently propose in FY '26, and the rest of our 5-year capital plan for water and wastewater. And they looked at what different rates would do to the required subsidy to support those improvements. And looked at it in 2 scenarios, the 4%, which has been our historical target, and then if we went to 8% a year, that it would drop the subsidy at the end to about 1/4 of what it is now, I think is what it worked out to. So, and certainly, there's no immediate decision at this moment on for you guys in terms of what the rates are gonna be. However, if there are some numbers, those 2 charts, we can come up with in-betweens or ask them if there's a specific number that we want to run to see the impacts. We could do that as well as you finalize the budget.
Yeah,
Did I understand your recommendation on the allocation fees, and you recommended a 4% increase, or an increase every year?
4% each
As a-
year.
Right, and as opposed to, I mean, we've held it consistent now for maybe since the last rate study in 2006. Obviously, those are very outdated numbers, but you're recommending every year, just like the user fees, increase them.
Yeah, and then, you want to reevaluate each year. This is kind of showing what it looks like today for the next 5 years. At the end of those 5 years, it may reach at what is set adequately, and so you might have to raise it after that, but you just want to reevaluate your capital plan and capacity. Yeah, I did 4%, and then I just rounded to the nearest 100, I actually round them down, so, yeah.
and that's the idea of it is, it's those systems are supposed to pay for themselves, which in Kent County, they never do. That's why we see as much as a 32% subsidy each year, where we have to subsidize them. And
Yeah, and you're subsidizing not just the new customer costs, but existing customer costs too.
Right.
Just 'cause, yeah, it's a spread out system, you don't have a huge customer base.
That's right.
Not a lot of economies of scale.
Look, it's really not science. When you look at different towns and stuff, the more people, the cheaper to build.
Yeah.
That's across the board. That's the way it works. And heck, we'll run water and sewer sometimes. It won't be a half a mile between homes or between customers, and that's a tough business.
But you're understanding it's a community benefit, it's obviously a vital resource and.
In our case, the majority of our systems are in places where the people can afford the 4% increase the least. That's what we're faced with. So that, we do a 4%, but there's been some years where we didn't do it at all. And now, of course, we did put an influx of money into the repairs and stuff here that through that ARPA money that certainly helped with, and you've seen the subsidies have come down since then. But it's the same old picture. I appreciate what you've done. It's just, I guess we're gonna have to, we'll certainly take a second look at all of this as we go through the budget, but our budget's probably gonna dictate what we do this year for sure, like it always does.
Yeah, I present the facts and you have the tough decisions.
Yeah, that's right.
so,
Yeah, that's the way it
exactly.
goes, really.
Yeah.
Can you jump ahead 2 slides? I find this to be maybe one of the most fascinating takeaways from it is everybody here knows that we have high residential rates, but our commercial rates are near the bottom, and that may be someplace that we ought to look. Now, we don't have a ton of commercial in the county, but it does appear to me as though we could restructure to some degree, and our commercial properties are making out well versus the residential.
Yeah, your
Customers.
structure has a fairly high initial fixed charge, So it doesn't really allow customers to conserve much, if, because you have to kind of buy 12,000 gallons regardless of how much you use.
Right.
Now, if it's quarterly, a lot of customers are probably using over the 12,000, but, small customer, maybe not, if they're living Malone or something. But then with commercial, once you go past the fixed charge and you're actually getting into variable rates, your rates are probably lower than these other places because you're then falling down that.
I would think a
scale.
lot of that, a lot of our commercial hookups are marinas that are outside the town limits and stuff.
Yep.
Where does Tolchester, on this chart, where does Tolchester fit in? On this chart that he's got right up here now, where does Tolchester fit in? Because Tolchester, we're on sewers, so where would we fit in? What
Well, you're part of the
areas?
county.
It would be Kent County, yes.
Everything, all of our systems are under Kent County.
They have a universal rate, so it's not, specific systems don't have, it probably was like that years ago, but over time, you kind of went to a universal rate, which a lot of places are doing that.
Well, I don't know what to say, but I appreciate your study, and
I'm
like
not
you
up
said,
there.
you've done the best you can and putting the numbers together. Do we have any other questions of him right now? Gentlemen?
No, sir. Very well done. Thank you.
Thank you very much,
for your
and
time.
we appreciate you. Andy? I guess you're up. Good to see you, as always.
And you have a copy of what Andy submitted for his budget in the front pocket of your binder?
Yeah.
So gentlemen, Mr. Fithian asked which hat I was wearing today, so I should just start by saying it's Delmarva Community Services. To my right is Henry Teet.
To start with, Andy, you gotta check to see what hat he's wearing, because Andy, like me, he's been around a while, and,
I have been around a while.
he's been, Commissioner of Talbot County, right?
Yes, sir.
County Administrator of Talbot,
Yes, sir.
yeah.
That actually makes it harder to come in front of you because I know from your side just what a struggle it can be to balance the budget.
Well,
So,
we appreciate having people like that.
so Henry is our transit director, and Henry knows our routes much better than anybody else. So I think it was as much, Commissioner Fithian, you had an interest in having a conversation about transit to have us come in. At the same time, we have our annual budget ask. So I'll just go through and just interject or ask questions or whatever. So we're asking for a little over $157,000 in operating. You fund for the current fiscal year a little over $91,000. I've only been with the company 9 months, but within the last 2 years, I know that we've made that deficit up by using ARPA or COVID funds. That money is finished. We do not have the ability to make up the deficit anymore. Same conversation I'm having with the other counties, not just Kent. So without the additional funding, we're going to have to look at whether we need to modify, and by modify, I mean probably reduce routes. At the same time, this is not the most, I'm trying to choose my words carefully. This is not your strongest return on investment, dollar for dollar. Rural transit simply does not make money. It is not a moneymaker for us, and you are subsidizing rural transit for your citizens who in most cases simply have no other alternative. In a rural county spread out such as yours, in a perfect world, we would be able to do door-to-door service, mobility on demand. We have not been able to do that, but we have moved toward it quietly, surprisingly, this last year, which I wanted to talk to you about. But let me just give you a couple numbers so you at least know what we're doing. So you have 6 routes on, for Kent County. And your most popular route, we did 3,062 trips. That's the same as a Ryder. So a little over 3,000 people rode on that route. The second most used was 1,896. And where I'm going is the total number of people we served in transit was 6,728, so a little under 7,000 people. What's interesting is we started to do a Kent On Demand or MOD, Mobility On Demand program without advertising it, and that did 1,405 trips. So in rural transit, the industry is moving towards mobility on demand, basically an Uber service, where you can call and you get picked up and delivered to where you want. Now, that's done within county. That's not a call to go all the way to Easton or further along. We are already doing it in Talbot County effectively in the town of Easton. We have started doing it in Caroline on one of their routes. For rural transit, and you end up using much smaller vehicles, they're more cost-effective. You can more quickly get to people, and it's less cumbersome, especially for the elderly and the disabled, and that they're picked up at their door and dropped at their destination. We also can wait and then deliver them back home, as opposed to many hours wait to get back.
Listen, I've always, for as long as I can remember, have thought that what we do now is not the best way to do it. I've always thought that if we, and I've talked about this for a lot of years, if we had and I'll tell you what, I drove for that one time for about a year or so, year and a half with Best Care Ambulance, going and picking people up, elderly people up from nursing homes or veterans from their homes and taking them to the doctor and back. And that's why I got it. I was convinced after doing that that would service a lot more people and be a lot better than the bus service that we have. Now, listen, I'm not running that bus service down because it's the best we got, the only thing we have right now. But if those buses, in my opinion, what do you say, we have 5 routes? 6 routes. If we had 4 or 5 of them small vehicles that are wheelchair accessible, on demand,
Right.
I bet you we'd serve more people at a much cheaper cost than them big buses running from here to Easton or wherever they're going.
I think you're absolutely right.
And I've talked about that
I know.
for a lot of years, so I don't know how we do it, how we put it together, I'm not sure how to make it work, but that's how I mean, one of the things that I don't like about the buses, in our case, you're picking up people that don't have a means of transportation, whether they're elderly people, you're dropping them off. One thing an elderly person don't need is something else to worry about. Is that bus gonna come back? Am I in the right place? How long I gotta wait? All that stuff, whereas if you're doing it on demand, they know that they call, you go pick them up, you take them where they're going, wait for them and take them home. They're much more satisfied, it happens much quicker. I think they're more satisfied, and I think 3 or 4 of those vehicles running around Kent County, I think, during the operation hours, not 24 hours a day, but would benefit Kent County immensely. And it would take somebody like us sitting down with somebody like yourself that understands it better, what's available, how we get these vehicles, we have a dispatch service here, and, we do our dispatching out of the 709 Morgneck Road, and I've been convinced for a lot of years that this was what we should be doing. I just not smart enough to do it.
No, so I think that, well, the smartest one in the room we know is your county administrator. So I've met with her and gotten her input on transit. I'm meeting with Jamie Williams on Friday to talk about that, especially from an employment perspective. We met with your superintendent this morning at her request because she's interested in dual enrollment down at the college. So Cliff Coppersmith was there as well. There's a concern on her part that you all need to have more challenging curriculum at the high school level, and she would like to promote that, and she would like us to be part of that in terms of transit. So we already operate a bus route that stops at the college from Chestertown, so that is a strong possibility. So you don't get rid of all your bus routes, because people still need to get out of county.
Well,
But
and that used to bring up one other problem that I thought about. One of our bus routes, if I'm not mistaken, takes a fair amount of students to a private school somewhere.
Saints Peter and Paul and
I know, I'm trying, yes,
And I didn't want to interrupt that.
understand.
I did not want to, I didn't want to do anything. They've been dependent on that for years, and I wouldn't have wanted to do anything to disrupt that.
So I don't want to upset people, but the return route for that school run is 2 or 3 students. So when you look at cost, that is something that does not make as much sense as one that has higher volume. I totally respect where you're coming from,
I thought it was more than that.
With enough notice, I think we need to consider whether that is the most effective use of state, county money or not.
I got you.
And it may have been higher. They may have, some may have graduated.
I thought
Am
it was
right, Henry?
more.
Yeah, yeah, it used to be a lot more, but
That's that's the
Yeah.
numbers that I was
Yeah.
thinking, and I thought,
And I think Santo Grande went
but
out
I
this
thought maybe
way.
there was a way to do what I wanted to do without disrupting that. I guess that was my
Understood.
thought
Well-
process.
well, also, those kids that do ride, it's a route bus. It's not a special bus that we just go to the school with anyway.
Right.
So they go along the route,
Right.
so,
So we're not allowed to just do transportation.
yeah, right.
Transportation.
And every time that I've ever brought this up, I think the three of us was at Upper Shore Aging one time, and this come up. And we talked about it. You might have even been there
I was.
at that time.
Right.
And they were very receptive of that. They thought it was a good idea as well, but
Correct.
we just haven't had the time or to put enough, we just haven't done it.
Well, that's
Because
fine.
it's-
I think there's some onus on our part too to do it. I don't think it's just you. Considering everything that the commissioners deal with, I think we as transit people, if you all are interested and willing, need to probably start that dialogue instead of expecting it to come from your end. That's all. You know,
Well, I
Henry's an
appreciate
expert, I am not, but we can have that conversation. But right now, in terms of shifting it, we're at a budget cycle where there's not time. We would need time going into the next fiscal year to set up mobility on demand to a more extensive purpose. I will say this, Kent County is so spread out in terms of your villages and your towns.
Yeah.
Mobility on demand is primarily within one, I don't want to say urban, but concentrated area, because the key to that is quick trips back and forth, picking people up. I do know that we have been going to Rock Hall and perhaps other areas as well, which is not your normal. But I'm willing to give some flexibility on our part with adequate funding to see just what that extreme would be. You know, I don't know how often those trips would be. I don't. Yeah, so it's an interesting dilemma on your part. I understand that we sometimes have empty buses or buses with only one or two people on. Typical rural transit, a better operation, I think, is mobility on demand. But that's a major shift and we need some time to do that, but we'd be happy to work in that direction. Makes sense.
Well, I'm speaking for myself. Man, my colleagues are certainly going to have some questions, and I think one of the questions is we got to see how we're floating at the end of this.
Unfortunately, I understand. I'd rather just pound the desk and say, fund us, you need to do it, but I know you have competing interests. My job is to figure out and articulate as best I can how to help your most vulnerable citizens.
So you're asking for 159 now?
157,
157?
475.
And that will keep everything moving for
That keeps-
another year
that
while we
keeps
figure
everything-
out how we could make it better.
Right, and it also allows us, I would like to try to grow the mobility on demand program, and I think we need to do that through active advertising versus just word of mouth right now. But I also expect that number will get bigger, and with that probably comes the need for more vehicles, smaller vehicles and things of that sort. But I think that's a good problem for us to have. The only other point I'll have, and I'll stop, is, and I told Ms. Heller about this, I've talked to Talbot County and I've talked to Caroline. Right now, transportation in the three Upper Shore counties is split evenly on cost, so you all are paying the same amount that Talbot is, and Talbot gets a boatload of more transit than you all do. And speaking as a former Talbot County manager, I'm telling you, you, Caroline, and Talbot need to sit down and look at a reallocation of that. It's not fair.
Some sort of a cost share rate.
Similar to the college, where it's based
Right.
on.
Population or usage or whatever.
Right, so I don't know that the 157 this year will be that high next year if a I know it won't, if a reallocation occurs. Talbot's number will go up, I've already talked to them about that, but Ken and Caroline's number should go down because you don't have as much ridership or as many routes. But right now, y'all are paying the same. I wouldn't have taken this position when I was with Talbot County, but now I can tell you, it's just not, it's not fair. Henry, did you want to add anything?
Unless I got some questions.
Okay.
Because I mean, you know, when some of those buses are going as far as Easton, I guess.
Absolutely.
But well, for a couple people, well, if you got one of those little vehicles, Easton isn't that far away. We could, that little vehicle could make 2 or 3 of those trips a day if you had to.
Right.
I mean, we can do, it's not like you need those buses to make these longer trips. In fact, I think, in my opinion, it's kind of counterproductive.
Yeah, I think MDA for decades has focused on larger equipment,
Yeah.
including in the rural areas. And in terms of the number of people we transport, it makes sense to have minivans and things of that sort for certain circumstances.
Well, we're gonna look at our budget, and I don't wanna be the only one speaking here, my colleagues wanna chime in, but I for one, would hope that, we could work towards that
I appreciate
transportation on
that.
demand.
And we need to be committed to moving on that within this next year to demonstrate it works, or not. And
Right,
that's a whole
right.
nother conversation next year. I'll add one other thing. We do not own transportation on the shore. If and when you all decide that there is a better or more effective or more cost-effective provider, I am wide open to that. I want what's best for the people that have no other choice in terms of relying on this. So if Queen Anne Ride or somebody else can do a better job, Godspeed. I don't believe it in terms of cost, but, that's my objective more than it is keeping it unto ourselves. That's not my interest.
Very good.
Okay?
John, you gonna?
It's my understanding from listening that, compared to last year's request, you're looking for basically like another $40,000.
It's more than that.
A little over 60.
60.
I think our request last year was underfunded, which is understandable.
Correct.
We had asked for a similar amount last year.
So $65,756.
Geez, Pat, thank you for that.
Just trying to be helpful, Andy.
Yeah. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
We will be in
It's fine.
touch.
That's fine. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank
know-
you, I appreciate you coming down and,
I know it's a struggle.
yeah. And you and I were having a little conversation earlier. I mean, obviously, no one's, absent from these cuts that's coming from a lot of different directions.
Correct. We're already seeing them at our level. Absolutely.
Yeah.
100%. And I expect more to come. My other fear is if and when they get over to the transit transportation and transit, if at the federal level they look at what's a lost leader, it's going to be rural transit. So my fear is that that grant money could even become more constricted. Don't know.
So it might even be beneficial for us if we're gonna be in a transportation business to try to scale down and do something that's a little more efficient here in the county.
Correct. I think I told somebody it's like grabbing Jello right now. You just don't know.
No, I hear you.
You don't. It's a very, very hard way to run a business or a county government. Understood.
Well, thanks a lot, Andy.
Thank you all very much.
Yes,
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Pat.
Okay.
All right, is that it?
So can we get the yard drive? So I thought we'd start by just looking at the overview again, which you can look at in your binders while we get it up on the screen. So,
Pat, have a microphone over there?
oh, yeah, I'm just not standing in front of it.
Okay. I mean, you can move it. I'm just,
Oh,
If
where
not-
will I not be in your way? Okay. Okay, so if you look at the first,
Just trying to figure out how to get to.
the first page of the binder is the revenue summary. And as we talked about last Tuesday, we're going to have about 2.3 million in new revenue. If you flip back to page 3, which is the expenditure summary, the expenditures for the FY26 budget are $72,736,000, and the expenditures exceed the revenues by 5.7 million. So as we usually start through the budget process, we kind of look at it by category. If you look over at those increase, decrease dollars and percentages, you can see where the requests are. If we start at the top, there's the 438,000 in the new state mandates. I honestly don't know if those numbers have moved around. I got to get on online and take a look. Shelley, I don't know if you've heard anything.
I have not heard a lot. The biggest feedback I have received, which I've shared with you, are the updates on the middle school funding. But as far as the cost shares,
Okay.
I haven't heard yet. I'm still waiting.
Okay, so that's our best number. The public school funding number that's in here is maintenance of effort. Now, I think that they will be coming in to present their numbers. I really haven't seen them yet, so I'm not sure if they're asking for more than maintenance of effort.
Just gonna need your pass.
Oh, sure, sorry. Is this, no, manual? So we're really not sure, but that is what it would be at its lowest funding level. Then you can see the salaries and benefits. So the salaries, we have requests, we have the 4% salary increase in here. And there's a couple of new positions that we kind of went over. The benefits are going up $1.2 million. Capital, a little over $500,000. The lease capital looks like it's going down, but that is just because we do not have the enterprise lease numbers in here yet. The county allocation figure, that's a little misleading. It looks like it's only increasing 60,000, but we had two very large one-time FY '25 items that are decreasing, and that was the 300 and some thousand to Rock Hall and the 80,000 to Chestertown for the restrooms. So there really are a lot of increases in that category. So are we?
Trying to find your, I can't see it, I'm trying to find the hard drive.
The hard drive? Or I can find it. You want me to?
I just can't, I'm sorry, I can't
That's
read
okay.
it. Those are- Okay, but.
Is
not
it gonna
quite.
come on that PC or no?
It's gonna just be here.
Oh, okay.
Now, I can swap your screen.
No, it's okay.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
fine.
We can do that. No, we can do that.
Okay.
That's probably gonna be better.
All right.
It's just too hard to see.
Yeah, it really is.
Okay,
Oh, now it went over there.
that's
Okay.
good. Now I think that's where we're just gonna
Okay.
end up.
All right. Sorry, guys. Technology's great until it's not. Okay.
See where your hard drive is.
Make up my mind.
Sorry, Mike.
Hey, you're getting your steps in
I've
today.
got last meeting's numbers, but I'm interested in what the revisions are.
We haven't made any yet, so they're the same numbers.
This does not include the leases for the vehicles, because we don't have those numbers yet, so those will be updated in the near future.
Let's see. Okay, so we're on the expenditure page, so this is what we're kind of walking through. So the county allocations, like I said, even though it says 60,000, if you back out that almost, sorry.
You've been gaming.
No, but maybe it's trying to tell me something. Maybe we could make some money for the county. What do you think? So there really is about $400,000 or $500,000 of new requests in that county allocation number. The operating categories are going up just under $700,000, and the transfers $930,000. So usually what we do is we start category by category. The allocations or the capital are usually good places to start. I have the detail on both of those sections if you have a preference. And we had Andy in here, we can look at all the allocations, just kind of look at those summaries if you want to start there.
I think that's the last thing we should look at.
Okay,
That's my opinion. Because we may want to just do a flat percentage
right.
like we talked about last year.
But there's a lot of agencies that aren't asking for anything. So there's a handful that are asking for a lot, so.
And Pat, do we still have, I think last week you mentioned that when you looked at the FY '25 budget, there was like 400,000 that hasn't been spent throughout all of our departments.
If you look at this schedule, we're projecting to spend $63,115,000, and the budget is $68,206,000. So we're expecting to come in significantly under budget this year.
So is there anything that we should maybe consider implementing
So we have reached out, Shelley reached out to the departments. Shelley,
Sort of a spending freeze or?
well, you mean to spend it now instead of next year?
So we've received,
No, I'm talking about holding on to it, unless you really have to have it.
Holding on to FY '25 money? Well, I mean, we're coming in already significantly under budget. I'm not sure what you mean in operating or in?
Wherever they can hold it.
Well, I think that's always the directive to them, is not to spend it unless you need it. I can take a look and
Yeah, but
see.
some people understand that better than others.
we can certainly emphasize that.
Yes.
I have received, I don't know if Pat's received any more requests than what I have seen, but we've received 2 requests. You had asked who can absorb some of these one-time costs into their current budget, and I've received a response from 2. We've got one from Jim Miller. He had a $5,000 scanning project, and if he rearranges budget lines, he can go ahead and absorb that with your blessing. And Jill Coleman said that she can pay for the main drain covers for the Millington pool out of the current budget. So there are those 2 requests on the table. Both of those are smallish dollar value.
How do I stop
And that's
this?
not exactly what you're asking for, but I did want to put those on the table.
I'll tell you what
Because
else I
it's tied
think we
to
gotta,
your,
Yeah, so
we
it's
gotta
in
talk
the,
about, which will make
there's
us,
notification somewhere. Oh, just turn
So
the sound down.
yep,
Here,
that's what I was
can
gonna
it.
do.
is these large capital projects, like the school.
Just turn it all the
Oh,
way
no.
down.
We know
That's
what
crosstalk.
funding is gonna be.
Display
Yeah, just pull it
I
all the
mean,
way
or
down.
is there anybody is anybody serious about building a middle school? I mean, those kind of things, I think, need to be ruled in or out. Because with them, you can say, well, we'll borrow that money. Along with borrowing it, you still got a payment each year, which is gonna be on top of what your requests are. So some of these big projects, we gotta decide what we're serious about or what we ain't serious about.
Yes.
I mean, does that make sense? Because, you know, if you're talking about building a middle school, for example, there's no way you're getting out of that without $700,000-800,000 payment a year to pay for your share of it. So you can put that on top. I mean, that's a big addition to your budget. If you're
Right.
talking about the jail, there's a big cost that comes with that. Some of these projects, I think, you gotta know what you're gonna do with them, because this Penny Ante stuff, you can argue about it all day long, but it ain't gonna amount to one of them projects.
And I would recommend, now would be a good time to start reserving funds out of fund balance for these larger costs, not to be master of the obvious here, but the more you put down on it, the less your debt service is gonna be. So if you put down $10 million in one of these large projects and you only have to borrow, depending on which project, but let's just say 4 million, your debt service or your recurring charge year over year is gonna be a lot less. So instead of, you don't wanna spend down the one-time money just to spend it down. Really, what we need to start doing is reserving that money so it's set aside. It's not in the fund balance anymore, let's say.
We gotta decide what we're serious about and what
Correct.
we're not serious about.
Correct.
Because we could waste 2 or 3 months here picking and choosing I'll take 10,000 off of this or 5,000 off of that. But one of those big projects can wipe all of that out. And are we serious about it? And if we are, then we got a plan for that.
Exactly.
And the one strength we have entering this budget year is the strength of our fund balance. So if you look at the screen there, we're projecting to end '25 with about 18.2 million, and 4.7 million of that is the target. I'm sorry, we're ending with 22.9, just about 23 million. So we're going to have 18.3 million above our target. So we really do have a chunk of money that we probably do need to talk about. And, right, maybe capital is the place to start.
I mean, if you're gonna do any of these capital projects, you gotta plan and you gotta know what it's gonna cost you, I think. And if, it takes a whole lot of $10,000 and $20,000 cuts to equal one of those plans, one of those big projects. That's
And
just,
regarding the middle school, assuming what passed in Annapolis yesterday, assuming that goes forward into the governor's budget for the next year and the following year, there's
we'd
no.
owe $32 million on an $8 million school, if that's the number.
So yeah, right, and so it's still basically a $30 million lift. Now, you could put every bit of that overage toward it, but you're still gonna have a significant debt payment, and that doesn't include the other, capital projects we've talked about, like the regional jail, whatever it is we're gonna do to Wharton Elementary School, et cetera.
Speaking of the regional jail, have we heard anything from Queen Anne's about what they did?
Right now, all I have is that Queen Anne's and Caroline are looking at operating costs, but I do not have an update from that. I have asked for an update, but there's nothing new to report. So we do not have commitment from Caroline one way or another, which really puts the whole project on hold.
So would you like to start with the capital section of the budget, since that seems to be the,
Well, but, I mean, I agree with Ronnie, but I still think we have a lot of unanswered questions, like the jail. More questions than answers on the jail.
The same way with the school.
It's almost the same way with the school.
Absolutely. I mean, well, with the school, we don't know what the project will cost. I mean, we don't have an estimate of the future cost of it, but we know right now that we're gonna be paying 50%, well, not 50%, but 50% minus, what was it, $3,000,
I thought
$3
they-
million a year, 2 years, or?
I thought I remember hearing that they increased their contribution up to 65. Did I not hear that?
So, yes, and the reason for that is because we get 3 allowances of 5% each. I could find the details in here, I don't have them at my fingertips. But what it still comes down to is right there with that straight allocation, that still puts us at 57% because of the square footage that's currently proposed at the middle school. Now, Dr. McComas has been looking and working with Dr. Lever on where we could pare down the school. The reason the percentage is so off is because the IAC will only agree to a certain amount of square footage per their guidelines, per their regulations. And the proposed middle school far exceeds that. So it puts a bigger burden. They're not gonna cost share what they feel
With a
is too big.
declining population, I would question that too, and it's been a declining, I don't know about the numbers this year, but if they
We
ain't
had
declining,
declining this year as well.
then it's been declining for 30 years, and we're trying to design something.
So the schools are working on that, and Dr. McComas and her board will be in at some point to talk about options for that middle school. What's currently been proposed to put in the governor's budget is $4 million in the next 2 fiscal years, which really only brings basically our cost down to, like I said, about 30 million, which is still a really, really heavy lift. What's the debt service, Pat?
on the 30 million, it was over $1 million a year.
So add
I
that to
mean,
the operating.
Yeah.
Yeah, so if you had a $1 million payback on top of what these requests are,
Correct,
then you'd really have a struggle on your hands.
correct.
But before I think I want to have an opinion on that, don't you? We should probably talk to, or at least listen to the school board.
Sure.
Oh, no question about it.
Yes.
And discuss with them.
They're actively discussing how to attack it, and as
I
soon
mean,
as they.
I think, and I'm still gonna kind of stand by, if I'm not mistaken, we were all three fully committed at around a 10 to 15% cost share, as I recall.
That's
When-
about right.
A year ago, or
You're
year,
right.
2 years ago,
You're
year and
right.
a
When
half,
it was-
whatever it's been.
When it was first proposed to us, it was, would you build a new school if we could get it down to the state paying
Yeah.
96%?
Right.
That's what the number I remember,
That's-
98%. I'll even go and
We
say
talked about both of those numbers, 96 and 98.
80, 90, 10 or something. And I said, hell, yeah, heck yeah.
Right, we all
would.
said, yes, absolutely.
Yeah, but that ain't, we're far from that.
That's my point, is I think that the school board should be
Yeah,
aware.
Council was looking for 98%, if you recall.
Correct. But I think that the school board should be aware of where I think my ceiling, floor, whichever you want to call it, is at. Because I think that that's what the county can afford. Whether we do this middle school or not, which we're going to have to do something, somewhere, somehow. Those are options that the school board, I think, needs to present to the commissioners.
I agree.
We have to do something at the jail, whether it's here or there.
Correct.
That's got to happen as well.
Absolutely.
So, but both of those items, we have too many more questions
More
than we
questions
have
than
answers
answers.
right now.
That's right.
But you could take, for example, $5 million and reserve it for the middle school.
I have no problem
$5
doing
million,
something like
you know, I mean, and those are decisions as we near the end of the budget cycle. You can look at what we have as our target, or our likely fund balance, and you can start earmarking
I have no
that.
problem at all doing something like that.
Yeah, I mean, you can attack it from either side. You can balance the budget and then see what's left, and then when you have that pot of money that's left, you can decide how to allocate it. Or you could decide if you really had firm belief in which projects and how much.
Listen, when I brought this up, I just wanted to put it on record that these things are hanging out there over our heads, are just big decisions we gotta make. I have no problem with going through our budget and saying, well, you know, we can afford to cut this back
Right.
or that back.
Right.
I mean, but these big projects, they're gonna make you do a lot of thinking. And the more you strap yourself to some of these bigger projects, obviously, the deeper you're gonna wanna cut into this stuff. So do our roads need fixing more than we're willing to put into the road? I don't wanna see us destroy the operation of Kent County thinking that we're gonna do one of these projects and then we're not gonna do it. And I don't know, it's just, it's a lot to think about.
It is, and something that you can't lose sight of is if it's a bigger building than what's currently in existence, or there is new technology in there, it's going to cost more to run. So not only do you have debt service that's going to be going into the operating budget, but you're also going to have higher operational costs.
And we're in pretty strange times right now. We
just
don't know what's gonna happen on the
Right.
federal level, and we never know what's coming out of Annapolis. Things change on a yearly basis. We've been pretty good at making sure we're prepared for next year. I hope we don't lose track of that somehow, and putting some money aside, that's a no-brainer to me, absolutely. I didn't mean to disrupt the conversation, but those items are out there, and they're a big part of this budget.
So maybe I can give a little bit of good news, and the three of you know, but for anybody, the whole world that's listening, because our meetings are so important, I'm sure we have lots of people listening to our meetings, is the school system did get $150,000 to help with the maintenance costs of the
I
middle
just
school for
started
this
to ask
coming
you
year.
that question. I read that someplace, that they got $150,000 to put towards renovate, repairs and maintenance of the
Whatever
middle school.
Exactly.
It's
yes.
earmarked for the middle
Yes,
school.
correct.
Gotcha.
So I think the state is hearing us on some level, and that's a pretty big commitment, in my opinion. But it's still the bottom line of the
I mean,
numbers.
out of a $67 billion budget,
Yeah.
that's,
But it could have been zero.
I understand.
Could have
I'm
been
kidding with
zero.
you. Right.
So would your preference be to start balancing the operating budget and then see where we land with fund balance?
We gotta go at all, I don't care, we're gonna go through the whole thing anyhow, whatever you all wanna do, whatever you think's the best, I don't care.
Well, the sections that we have, today, we need to schedule a private or a closed session for the personnel request, so we'll have to pick a week to do that. So the sections that we can look at today are either allocations, capital, or operating.
Or we
just-
could look at the new positions, that doesn't have to be, if you're interested.
Yeah, they're not in their books.
Oh, okay, never
Yeah.
mind, we will.
But we could talk to them, I mean.
They're
like,
pretty
there's-
easy.
They're actually,
We will fund every one you have in here.
they're actually in the other books, and we could if you want to. There's really two requests.
Right.
There's the EMTBs, there's 4 EMTBs, and we happen to have the subject matter expert, as Jim says here in the room. And the other one was for a school resource officer. So there's really a request for 5 new positions.
And that was for the Galena Elementary School.
That was for the
if I'm not
Galena Elementary
mistaken.
School. That is correct.
And it's, I certainly understand the logic behind that, because they are sort of away from,
And there's a huge variance in the cost. We're looking at scaling that number back. If we can find somebody that is retired, who doesn't need health care, it's a much cheaper ticket than if we have to hire somebody that's not retired and needs health care. So, there'll be a spread in that number.
I understand the logic behind it, I don't know if we can afford it, but I understand the logic behind it.
Yeah. And the EMTBs, if you have any questions about the needs for those, like I said, we have Pete sitting in the audience today.
Pete, why don't you just for sake of teaching us something, explain to us how the operations operate real quick, and why you need this extra EMT.
What we're finding is, I think the year before last, EMS came to you requesting 4 EMTs, and they were provided 4 part-time EMTs. And what we're finding is the relationship that most all the EMS personnel have is secondary employment in other areas. And we're having trouble filling the part-time positions with available people. So we have positions that go unfunded. We're ending up utilizing our personnel paying overtime to fund scheduling around the clock. And we know that we're anticipating calls to go up somewhat in Betterton. Luckily, it's not that much. We're covering it now, but it's going to go up a little bit because we would be staffing that station as well.
Do you know approximately how many calls, Pete, that we're anticipating?
In
area?
Betterton?
Yeah.
I can get you the exact number. It's, again, I'm going to say it's under 200 a year. It could go up, it could go down. And it's not specifically for Betterton, they're call areas.
No, I understand. Yeah, I'm in that call area.
So we have full-time, 24-hour-a-day coverage in Galena, Rock Hall, and
Right now,
Lynch.
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 So Lynch is moving to Chestertown.
Right.
I live in Steel Pond Neck. If I have an emergency for me, how long will it take someone to get to Steel Pond Neck?
If they're in quarters I'll use Chestertown, it would add about 12 minutes to the call. That's if they're in Chestertown. If they're in Betterton, of course, it'd be a lot closer, same as Lynch. While the facility kind of lacked in Lynch, the location of it was a little more central in the county.
It is, it's a central, that's why the school was built where, the schools are built where they're at, it's because they're
Correct.
kind of right in the center of the county.
I think that the way the system's set up with the bulk of the calls happening in Chestertown, it kind of throws the numbers and/or response time off. But there is a longer response the further out, whether it's
I mean, it
Eastern
would
Neck
make sense.
Island or Gulf.
But what do you think, I'm just, Betterton, it doesn't matter, ball field, I'm saying Steel Pond Neck, but, are we 15 minutes from a response, are we 20 minutes, are we 10 minutes? And I know it depends on where but if there's an EMT in Galena.
I'd say within 15 minutes.
Okay.
In Betterton, well,
And that's rural.
Yeah, oh, absolutely.
That's running
Sure.
code, which,
Yeah.
depending on the call, you don't necessarily want
Absolutely.
to be doing.
Yep.
And we're lucky that a lot of times the sheriff's department responds as well, or they have the ability to get there just as the state police. A lot of our law enforcement run on the medical calls.
Explain to me one more time, just our involvement in Betterton. I mean, are we putting some of our paid EMTs and paramedics down there?
That was the ask from Betterton Volunteer Fire Company. That's our
Right, I remember
plan.
when they,
I just requested Betterton does not have the money to pay for the facility to be renovated. So that's going to be an ask that you'll see come through.
they want to put a place at the firehouse.
They're going to renovate their
Bunk room.
bunk room. As it stands right now, it's not really habitable.
And
How's their phones?
as I understand it, oh. Betterton is in
The phone ward-
conservation mode
the phone
because they
just
want to buy an
went off.
ambulance.
The phone police got caught.
Look, I'll take charge. I'll make sure she doesn't do that anymore. I do, you can bet. I'll ask her how her phone is when she comes in.
I can tell you, well, Betterton seems, and they are committed. One of the bids we got is from a member who's doing a lot of the work for a reduced price, as well as Betterton just purchased, if you remember in their letter about a year ago to you, they were considering replacing an aged ambulance, and they actually just did that. So that kind of put them in the position that they're in. So they're wanting to improve their service, and they're asking us to help them do it, and they've shown commitment with.
Help them by what?
No, they bought an ambulance.
That's what I'm saying, but they want us to help us with responders? I mean,
They will help us with the equipment. If they have responders, they will, but that's part of the problem. That's why they asked. They don't have the responders that they used to. They haven't been able to make calls. So it would be twofold. Putting personnel there would decrease response time, and have available people.
Kennedyville doesn't have an ambulance.
No.
But the facilities in Betterton are lacking, so Betterton is asking for county assistance to renovate that space,
To the tune of what?
about $45,000.
$45,000.
Well, I guess you just lost your carpet.
The art of compromise. I know how it goes.
Just get.
but then on top of that, they're asking us to put some paid people up there. Is that right or not?
Yes.
Which would be what, a EMT and a paramedic?
EMTs. Normally not a paramedic. Running the paramedics out of a centralized location where they're used the most, say Chestertown, makes a little more sense, especially like during low call times.
So you'd put an EMT up there and
To
Two EMTs,
two EMT.
and that way they're guaranteed in their call area to get out.
And at Rock Hall, Galena, and Chestertown, what staff?
They have
how do we staff
EMTs
that?
and paramedics. There's
Have what?
EMTs and paramedics.
Right.
There's usually a paramedic.
One of each?
Usually, yes, sir.
Yes.
There
One
could
to
be,
drive,
there
one
could
to-
be occasions where, because of scheduling, there might be two EMTs and not a paramedic, but the paramedic at the central location, whether Lynch or Chestertown, would move around.
I got you. Good.
Any other que,
You answered my questions. I appreciate it.
okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's get to cutting something.
Okay, so,
You need a red pen?
Yeah, I do.
okay, so I would say the best places to start would either be allocations or capital. Those are the largest ones that probably need to come down. If you were considering like doing a blanket percentage increase across the allocations, it would give us a good idea of a number that we could take out. If you want to look at the capital, that is one of the largest requests in here. Like I said, we'll have to do a closed session for the salaries.
The specific personnel requests.
Specific personnel requests. We can look at the operating, but that's, I would suggest the allocations or the capital, if you want to get your red pen out.
Which one?
Either the allocations from the agencies or the capital requests from the
Let's do
department.
allocation.
Let's
We're
do
right
Okay.
there, let's do it.
All right, okay, so you have a tab in your book,
Page 8
page 8.
Of allocation.
for the highlights.
Okay. So the largest request is from the Health Department, and you can see that on the first page. That's a funding formula. There's a chance it's going to go down, the state funding, so that would have our funding go down.
The state funding is going down?
Well, the formula is a percentage, like the state determines what they're gonna give the health department, and that becomes 69% of the funding, and we have to pay the other, like 31, 32%. So if the state funding goes down, then our share will go down. I have no information, but they thought, their best guess was that that number could go down, the health department staff.
These are the details, so.
So,
And I think Pat mentioned this last week, but it's very deceiving when you look at the overview, because the town of Rock Hall and the town of Chestertown were one-time funding requests. So even though it appears as though the allocations are only going up $60,000, they're actually going up significantly higher than that.
So if we walk through it, we can look at the areas. So the health department, there probably isn't a lot we can do if the state does not change what it's funding to the health department. We are going to be required to pay that $1,159,000. The increase in funding, how they propose to allocate that, you can see that 119, basically 120 will go into the allocation. Some will go into the mental health and some will go into the adult daycare. They're also asking us to carry over the 60,000 from FY '25 for those 4 environmental health specialists. So I think that could be a decision to be made. I don't think they were able to attract any candidates this year, and that shows actually in a salary and benefit line, so it's not included in the allocations, but it's certainly something to consider for FY '26. If you remember from last year, the health department funded us. We received money for the prime care medical treatment in the detention center and mosquito control, and they picked up part of the rent. So this year, the changes in that revenue are, they're passing the rent back to us, and they're funding 50% of the mosquito control. So, so the funding, the revenue coming back from them is going to be less than it was last year. I guess what they said is an update, we'll have an update on April 10th as to what the core funding is. So next week when I come back, it might be less. So if we go ahead and look at the next largest,
So the actual increase
Is
is 150,000.
150,000.
right, and if the funding formula doesn't change, we can't change that number. I think the only thing we have discretion over is that 60,000 for the positions that we committed to in FY '25. And they're asking for us to commit to it again in FY '26.
Those are positions
Aren't filled.
that aren't filled, but that's part of our problem with our,
Next week's discussion.
with
Yeah.
next week's discussion.
Eh,
Potential.
So they
don't think
can't,
so?
they
I
can't
don't know
pay,
about that. We'll see, before we slash it, because we,
these bonuses, they can't pay for that out of their core funding, so it has to sit on a separate line. That's why
Yeah.
it is where it is and why they're asking for it to be carried over.
All right, so then if we look at the next largest request, it's coming from the public library. So that's on the next page. So they're asking for basically 124,000, or a 15.6% increase. The largest part of that is in salaries and benefits. They want to create, and I'm still going back and forth because I don't think there's enough dollars in here based on what what the details are, but they want to hire 2 new positions, and they want to do a 5% salary increase.
Can I bring up, I'm just gonna throw this out there because of the side of the world I'm on. I think we should put a hiring freeze on all new hires unless it's for public safety. I'm just throwing it out there.
Well, I'm not in agreement of giving any new positions for what they're asking for there.
Not neither.
And I'm not in agreement of a 5% pay increase. Not when we're giving our county employees, or the proposal was 4%, and the may ends up being 3
And
by
we're
the
not-
time we're done.
They'll get what we get. They'll get what you all get,
Okay. And the new position?
as far as I'm concerned.
Yep, I agree.
No new positions.
Okay. Okay.
I mean, I think what they do is important, but,
Oh, absolutely.
but,
And they do a good job. We just got a
At least-
letter this week about that.
in these tough times, we just can't do that.
I've also asked, I had an opportunity to sit down with the new executive director this past week and talk about their proposal. And I explained to him that if some of these costs, which they are one-time, can they pay for some of those out of their fund balance? And if not, we can categorize them differently than an increase in operating. For example, the security cameras, the $15,000 for security cameras. They don't need that year over year, they only need that in 1 year. So he is looking at the budget and will make recommendations based on,
And right now, as it sits, they are increasing their use of fund balance by 15,000. So maybe he heard that request, and that's because the cost of the cameras is 15 and the increase. So when you look at those lists of offsetting things, those two would offset themselves if they're planning on using that fund balance increase to cover those cameras. Maybe that's their thought there.
I think you could answer a question for me too, and maybe I missed something, but I do know that we pay the rent for Galena Library.
It's in their, yes.
It's in their budget, but it comes from the county.
I mean, it goes into the pot, you know,
It's
they,
not-
Okay, well.
we have a large
I'm not,
percentage.
I'm not really even talking about that, but when, I do know that their budget, they pay, what happened when they went to Rock Hall? They never come in here and asked us for any rent money that I remember. They absorbed that out of their budget.
I don't remember them asking either. I think they absorbed it.
I'm going to say, I'm looking at so on page
Or
15,
did they get charged?
in there is the detail.
Yeah, they
Let's
moved
see.
from uptown.
I know, but to
Ah,
the
I'm in the
town,
wrong
right?
slides.
The town didn't give it to them.
Don't think so? Okay, that's all, I don't know.
I don't think so.
I don't think so.
I think they pay for it.
Because the town didn't own that building. I mean,
Okay.
That was,
Oh, I thought-
my daughter was had a hairdressing business in there one time.
That's right. I thought they were moving somewhere else. You're
With
exactly
the-
right, Ronnie, I'm sorry,
Their
yes.
office rent is going up slightly from 36,900 to 39,000 in their budget request. So it's a very, it's a relatively smaller increase, but there is an increase, and that's on page 15.
But I can assure you, they're not renting that building for $3,000. That one down Rock Hole.
No, I wouldn't imagine. I can get the detail on that for you.
Well, I was just